The Pontchartrain Park Pioneers Oral History Project is presented by the Center for African and African American Studies at Southern University at New Orleans and the following sponsors: the National Park Service, the United States Department of the Interior through the Louisiana Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, the Louisiana Office of Cultural Development, and the Division of Historic Preservation. My name is Dr. Clyde Robertson. I'm the director of the Center for African and African American Studies at Southern University at New Orleans. I am also the director, co-researcher, and co-interviewer for the Pontchartrain Park Pioneers Oral History Project. This oral history project examines the lives and experiences of the original homeowners and residents of Pontchartrain Park. The Pontchartrain Park Pioneers Oral History Project's team consists of Connie Abdel Salam, Assistant Professor of History at Southern University at New Orleans; Dr. Mike Mahan, Director of Satellite Communications at Southern University at New Orleans; and Miss Frances Helena, Senior Psychology Major at Southern University at New Orleans. Today's interview is taking place in the Millie Charles Social Work Building at Southern University at New Orleans. Today's date is June 12th, 2019, and the time is 4:30 p.m. Please tell us your name.
My name is Stephen S. Johnson III.
What is your birth date, Mr. Johnson?
September 18, 1932.
And where were you born?
I was born in New Orleans.
In what part of the city were you born?
I would think Charity Hospital.
And what part geographically, uptown?
That would be mid city.
Where did you live as a small child?
I lived with my grandparents for a while, then with my mother and father. And then my mother and father, of course, separated, and I lived with my mother for a while, and then I went to live with my father.
In what part of the city?
That was in the uptown area.
What schools did you attend?
I attended McDonough number 6, McDonough 35, Xavier University, and Southern University.
And that would be Southern University
in New Orleans.
New Orleans.
Right.
At Southern University at New Orleans, did you get your master's, your undergraduate?
I received my master's at Southern University in New Orleans because we did that in a pair, me and my wife, who has passed 18 years ago. But we did that together, and when it was necessary, we would take the trip to Baton Rouge to finish off the necessary coursework for our masters.
You spoke of your wife. What was her name?
Boutine, Boutine, P. Johnson. Parker was her maiden name.
And where did you all meet?
We met at McDonough 35 in high school. And we became friends, and we weren't necessarily close together at that time, but eventually we did get together, and thank God we did.
When did you get married?
I got married in 1951.
And do you have children?
Yes. I have 2 living children and 1 deceased.
And what are their names?
Stephen Sylvester Johnson IV, Roderick C. Johnson, and Stephanie Seabear. Stephanie Johnson Seabear.
Where did you and Mrs. Johnson first live when you were married?
When we were first married, we lived with her parents, which was on Broadway Street And as fate would have it, we became very close and a little out of sync. So she became pregnant at age 16. And this was a time when we were very fearful of what might happen. So needless to say, I took what I considered to be the best route and went into the military for 3 years. I volunteered and stayed there and came back and went and finished my high school, which I only needed about a semester. And then I started in at Xavier under the GI Bill of Rights.
And what year was this about?
1958.
1958. So you went into the service.
Yeah.
And
at 18.
At 18. And
got out around 22.
Did you
21.
Did you marry Mrs. Johnson before you went to the service or after you were discharged?
No, we got married once it was determined, that we were going to have an offspring.
So it was before?
Before the service.
All right. When you returned from the service, you had a child.
Yes.
Where did you all live then?
At that time, we temporarily lived with my mother-in-law and father-in-law. And then we eventually moved to my grandparents' home on Louisiana Avenue, which was for a short period of time because they had quite a bit of real estate there. It so happens. But there was a flood, I think. No, our house on Broadway Street burned down. And we wound up, that's how I wound up by my grandparents. And after we were situated, and then we saw fit to seek housing elsewhere. And that's when we discovered Pontchartrain Park.
How did you discover Pontchartrain Park?
Because it was in the news. And we had a very efficient, shall I say, realtor, David Greenup. And he was doing a magnificent job of inspiring folks to go there. Of course, it was to his advantage, but it was still a good thing. And we saw fit to do that.
And what year was this?
1960, okay.
1960. Okay, now you mentioned that you and Mrs. Johnson were at Southern University at New Orleans together pursuing your master's.
Correct.
When you moved into Pontchartrain Park, what were your professions?
I had become a teacher in the Orleans Parish school system. And my wife became a teacher also in the Orleans Parish school system.
So in 1960, you and Mrs. Johnson were teaching.
Right.
You said that you were in the military and you were separated from the military by 1960.
Yes.
How did you finance your home in Pontchartrain Park? Was it through the VA bill? Was it through other federal agencies?
Well, we did have a VA, loan of sort, which relieved us of the necessity to have more funding. And quite frankly, it worked out fine.
What if you could describe the other process of pursuing your home? For example, were there interviews that you had to tolerate? Was there other paperwork that you had to pursue?
Yes, of course, because it was something new, quite frankly. And remember, Pontchartrain Park was one of the first for minorities. And we all were excited, but at the same time, we had to follow the dictates of the procedure that was necessary to be a homeowner. And we did just that, and fortunately, we were able to get in.
Were there any other realtors other than Mr. Greenup that you're familiar with?
He was the main person as far as Pontchartrain Park was concerned.
The Urban League is part.
Of course, Strata was a big realtor during that time, in the city. But Greenup was avidly and strongly involved in getting Pontchartrain Park off the ground, and he pursued it vigorously. And of course, he was successful because he lived there himself.
Uh, what about the Urban League? Are you familiar with the Urban League questionnaire, the document?
Not really. I mean, I was familiar back in the day, if I can use that expression, that I was very conscious and cognizant of what was going on around me and in the country and in our society in general. But I wasn't tied to the Urban League in what I would consider a specific manner.
Were you familiar with the Urban League questionnaire concerning Pontchartrain Park?
Back in the day?
Yes.
Yes. That's probably how I got introduced to it. I mean, it's coming back to me now.
Yes.
But that had a great significance in my thinking that would be a good idea for me and my family.
Well, I know there was a lot of positive talk about Pontchartrain Park. Are you familiar with any of the negative talk in the 1950s and 60s about Pontchartrain Park?
Well, that's the nature of the beast. I'm sure they had some negativity out there, but I somewhat ignored that because I was more inclined to try and be accepted and have housing in that area. So there was some negativity. I don't know specifically what it was, but it was there.
We know that, for example, the great attorney, A.P. Turo,
yes.
Mr. NAACP himself, actually advocated against the establishment of Pontchartrain Park because it was going to be segregated. He was supporting integration. Were you familiar with his advocacy?
I was somewhat, yes, definitely. I know about A.P. Turo at the Knights Peter Claver building on Orleans Avenue. But I wasn't necessarily accepting the idea because I thought we needed to do something. And I was kind of young and vigorous then and had dreams of things that might come into fruition. But there was some folks that didn't think it would work out.
At the time you moved in, you and Mrs. Johnson were teachers. Where did you and Mrs. Johnson teach?
Well, I taught at Valeni C. Jones Elementary School, and my wife taught at Coghill. She started at Coghill, which was really in the same neighborhood of our home.
When you moved into your home, finally, what was your reaction? Were you ecstatic? Were you overjoyed? What was your reaction when you moved into your home finally in Pontchartrain Park?
I was ecstatic because I had achieved an objective, but I was also fearful of whether or not I was going to be successful at maintaining a home, because at that time, you have house note and the kinds of things that go with owning property. So I had to kind of move through that as best I could at my particular age and leverage.
And how old were you when you purchased your home?
I had to be 28 years old.
We know that you financed at least partially your home through the VA.
Mm-hmm.
When you moved into Pontchartrain Park, how many children did you have?
All three.
All three of your children
Yeah.
were already born before you
Correct,
moved
correct,
Pontchartrain Park.
Correct.
And while in the park, how long did you live in your home in Pontchartrain Park? Did you have multiple homes in the park, or did you live in your...
I lived in the same house at 5725 Campus Boulevard.
Can you describe your floor plan? How many bedrooms, how many bathrooms?
Well, originally, the home in Pontchartrain Park only had 2 bedrooms. And we, of course, saw the need that because of the size of our family, that we needed to get another bedroom. So we added on. And in adding on, we built what was to be considered a master bedroom. And out, we took up some of the yard that was behind the carport, and then we had 3 individual rooms for our children.
How soon after you moved in did you add on?
About 10 years, yes.
And you moved, did you also expand other aspects of the house, the carport and...
Well, that was the addition. That was when we enlarged the size of the house, because it wasn't adequate, as the children got older and as we, moved on.
Did you actually choose your floor plan, or did Mr. Greenup?
I think we took the floor plan that was in place. It's just that we did something about it later on when we increased the size of the house. But originally it was only about 1,000 square feet.
What was it like when you moved into the park?
It was a challenge, and it was something that was new to me and to many of the people that were there. And I think maybe the best or worst part of the experience was to go through the white section to get to Pontchartrain Park, because that's the way it was done back in those days. But it ceased to become a great problem, because being a Catholic, and we did have a Catholic church, St. Gabriel, and all my children were Catholic. My wife, who originally was Protestant, but she went the Catholic way as far as our children were concerned.
Well, let's go back to your discussion about Gentilly Woods.
Sure.
Is the white section.
Correct.
Correct. What kind of problems very early on did you experience going through Gentilly Woods to get to your home?
To be honest, I don't think I didn't have any problem, because all we were doing was going through. And it was on Press Drive, and it led straight to Pontchartrain Park. And once we got into Pontchartrain Park, then we were able to go in whatever direction we needed to, or where we lived.
All right. I may get back to that.
Sure.
Portion of the interview soon. Now, when you first moved to Pontchartrain Park, you moved on Campus Boulevard?
Correct.
How many families were there when you moved in?
When I moved on Pontchartrain, about three.
Three families?
Right.
Did you know them prior to moving into the block?
Not really. I knew some that moved in after. My partner in business, moved in shortly after me. And his brother moved in the house next door to me. And of course, we had some dear friends, the Turnleys, who lived across the street from us.
Did you know them before moving into Pontchartrain Park?
We did. Well, because of high school.
Yeah.
We knew them from McDonald 35.
And so did they have children the same age or around the same age as your children?
I would think so. Yes.
Now, what kinds of activities did you involve yourself with on the block? Were there, for example, cookouts, regular gatherings?
Well, ironically, you should ask that question, because we had a group of men, and I remember at that time I was a young man, and we would go in the park and play touch football, and we would go around in what we call a court and have a ping pong table and play ping pong, and the guys just moved in. It just happened, and everyone started having a relationship of a sort. We lost a dear friend, Warren Honoré, but we continued on after his passing.
Now, there was Campus Boulevard. Were there other people you knew around campus, on Prentice, on Press Drive, and the like?
Yeah, well, I knew you, your family, I knew your dad, right? And yes, there were other people that I knew. May not be able to pull them up at this moment, but I can pull you up. I remember you, right?
Do you remember any great stories about Pontchartrain Park? Any great legends?
Well, I think the greatest legend was the fact that we could have a subdivision as a people, and one that would be recognized throughout the country and the world for that matter. And it turned out that it's still there. And of course, it's going to serve its purpose because we have a younger generation coming along. And it's an opportunity for us to maybe help them to get their bearing and move on.
You mentioned playing touch football on the park with the other young men and,
right.
Around the community. Pontchartrain Park also had a golf course.
But they didn't have a golf course at that time. The golf course came later. That was just area that was available. And then the golf course came into existence. But the golf course wasn't for blacks per se. It was just a golf course. Although the blacks started to get into it, but not like it was already established in the other courses around the country and around New Orleans.
Did you ever take advantage of the golf course?
Never, no. That's just something I didn't take a dire interest in.
No. Personalities in Pontchartrain Park. Are you familiar with any grand personalities, any people of measure, if you will?
Waddell Michaud, who had a large funeral home, and they had a large house, was across from the golf course at that time. And the Turnleys, which were neighbors across the street, the Henrys, who I went to school with, Sterling and Elvira. Of course, Sterling passed a few years ago, but they were dear friends.
You mentioned your children.
Yeah.
Were there any advantages to rearing your children in Pontchartrain Park?
I thought there were advantages because we had what you might consider a better handle on their activities. Now, as life goes on, it doesn't always work out for you that way, but the opportunity was definitely there for folk to rear children like children should have been reared.
What were some of the advantages? We've established the fact that there were advantages. What were some of the advantages?
Well, the schools. While we were there, the Cock Hill was built, an elementary school within the district, more or less. And of course, Southern came on the scene sometimes after.
And of course, many of the children from Pontchartrain Park took advantage of
exactly.
As I did in terms of using the library for research sometimes. Were there disadvantages to rearing your children in Pontchartrain Park?
Well, the disadvantage is the same disadvantage parents have right now, making sure and hopefully that their children will stay on the right path. And you always have to keep your eyes open because that may be your responsibility that is going astray awry. But it worked out fine. Of course, unfortunately, my son passed at a young age. But other than that, and he had, I was so proud of him. Look, she doesn't want to talk about that, but I was, he got his master's, his BA, and his PhD.
You were a part of a neighborhood group that You were part of a neighborhood group that participated in carnival activities.
Exactly. We had one of the first carnival clubs in the city that would parade on Carnival Day. Of course, others followed, but I'm sure to think the name was High Low Bitters. We just kind of, everybody liked to play whist, and it turned out that that's how that name came into play.
Let's talk about Gentilly Woods again. Now, of course, we know that Gentilly Woods was that adjacent neighborhood,
Right.
which was white.
Correct.
We also know that your children went to St. Gabriel School and church. We know that you personally did not have any problems traversing Gentilly Woods.
Not really, no.
Did your children, to your knowledge, experience racism going through Gentilly Woods or going to the school and church?
I really don't recall, to be honest. Now, it's possible because that's the nature of the beast when you're growing up. Things happen, and your children, experience things that they don't necessarily want to share with you. But I'm assuming that it couldn't have been too terrible because everybody seemed to survive.
Now, you mentioned Pontchartrain Park. Now, when you first moved in 1960, the park hadn't developed fully.
Correct.
But
Correct.
by 1970, the park was fully developed with football teams, baseball teams, track, softball.
Right.
Did any of your children participate in NORD activities?
Yeah, my boys did. And my daughter did. She wanted to be an athlete too.
Okay, what activities did they participate in? Do you remember?
Football, basketball, softball. That was my daughter's.
Were you a member of the Booster Club? The
Yeah.
Pontchartrain Park Booster
Yeah,
Club.
yeah.
So you participated in the effort to get the park lights
Oh, definitely.
established and turned on.
Definitely.
What, for example, did you have to do in order for Pontchartrain Park to receive lights? Because that was a major achievement.
Exactly, but we had to request, and the city council to observe and recognize us as a product that was in the city and that it needed to be adjusted.
I am sensitive to that because I can remember my parents participating in that effort.
Oh, yeah.
That was a major achievement, although it may not seem that way now.
Correct.
Were you a part of the Pontchartrain Park Neighborhood Association? I know you were a booster member. Were you a part of the association?
Yes. I was.
What kinds of things did that organization do in the neighborhood?
Well, we attempted to get the play areas up to speed at the basketball court, for an example. And of course, we had a dues that we used to pay on an annual basis. About $120 something along that line.
And what success did you see occurring as a result of your advocacy as a member of the Pontchartrain Park Association?
I saw a lot of success because I watched it grow up around me along with my children. I mean, we saw the Pontchartrain Park after the fact, and we knew it before the fact, and it was just a great thing to have.
How did Pontchartrain Park during, for example, the late 60s and 70s,
Okay.
how did Pontchartrain Park look in terms of each home and the lawns and the gardens?
Everyone was proud and concerned. And if you went through the park, you would be able to see that. You could feel that there was a certain amount of pride that was expressed in the form of the activities in the way that the park was handled by the people who were responsible, the parents in particular.
When we talk about Pontchartrain Park and the playground, the types of beautification which occurred there, what are some of your most vivid memories?
I think my most vivid was the fact that they built a clubhouse on Press Drive, which was adjacent to what was the basketball court. And of course, the kids just automatically went there and took advantage of it. And as you walked around the park, you could see that we had nice lawns, of course.
When did Pontchartrain Park begin to change? Did you experience a change in Pontchartrain Park? If so, when did it begin?
Well, first of all, I don't think it changed. Now, when I was there, it didn't change. Now, I have to admit that there are some things that look different, but that's because the people that were there have either died off or moved on to different areas. But initially, it was what it was supposed to be, a community.
When did you all move from Pontchartrain Park?
I think we moved by 1979.
And what was the reason why you moved from Pontchartrain Park?
Well, it was because we wanted to move to a different level of property ownership. And not that there was anything wrong with Pontchartrain Park's level, but as you get older and as your business progresses, and of course I had gotten into the insurance business after teaching in school, and I had a partner, and we had an agency, and we were able to kind of do things that we wanted to do. He moved and I moved, and a lot of other people moved, but for reasons of their own. I can't say exactly why. I know why I moved, because it looked like it was the thing that I wanted to do for my wife and my family. And I will always, always remember the property that I purchased in Pontchartrain Park, was about as well kept and as good as it could be. And when we moved out of Pontchartrain Park, my wife complimented me on the fact that I was able to move her into another situation that she was comfortable in.
Now, you mentioned you had a business. You went from teaching school to
Insurance.
Acquiring a business.
Right.
What year was that?
About 19 years in Pontchartrain Park, but the business came before, so it was 1968.
1968.
When we went into the business.
And the business grew in 10 years, so by 1979, you had enough capital to move. Where did you move? From Pontchartrain Park to where?
To where I'm presently living. Lake Willow Drive.
Were there appreciable differences between Pontchartrain Park, your home on campus, and Lake Willow Drive?
I would think so.
In what area?
Appreciable in the sense that we appear to be surrounded by ambitious individuals who were striving and trying to raise their level and standards of living.
So, simply put, your home was bigger.
Yes.
And was it an integrated neighborhood into which you moved?
Yes, when we moved in. It's not integrated now, but it was then.
When you moved in, how were you accepted by the neighborhood and the neighbors?
They accepted us, you know, so. But of course, we were fortunate enough to have a piece of property that had a lake that was, there. So it made our area seem a little more luxurious than some of the others.
Now, let us go back in time. 1965, Hurricane Betsy. You were in Pontchartrain Park. You had been there for 5 years.
Right.
Did Hurricane Betsy damage your home?
Yes.
Was it the wind, the flood?
It was the flood more than anything else, right? And because I was in the insurance business, I was very cognizant of flood insurance. So we had it, Everyone didn't, but eventually they started having it because they realized that they could have disasters of that nature.
For Hurricane Betsy, did you and your family evacuate, or did you ride the storm out at home?
No, we didn't ride the storm out at home. We went first to St. Gabriel's area, and then we went to my grandparents' home, which was on the other side of town, on Louisiana Avenue, for that matter.
How long was it before you returned home to Pontchartrain?
A couple of weeks.
And when you returned home, your neighbors returned as well.
Started returning, exactly. Everybody got busy trying to do the things that needed to be done.
The assistance you received, again, was through the insurance that you had acquired.
That was my primary source of income, or of financial relief at that time.
After Betsy, did the neighborhood change for the better? I heard my father say the neighborhood actually changed for the better.
Well, I think so.
And how was that?
Well, because folk were able to spruce up their property and, do some of the things that they hadn't envisioned prior to.
There was another horrible hurricane
Katrina.
that impacts upon Pontchartrain Park. That's Hurricane Katrina.
That was bad.
That's right. You were on Lake Willow. You and your family were
Correct.
living in Lake Willow.
Correct.
Was Mrs. Johnson alive at that time?
No.
She had
Wife passed in 2002.
So, when Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005, you were in Lake Willow. Were you damaged? Was your property damaged?
Yes. We had to move out. And it turns out I had my granddaughter that I was concerned with, and my daughter, whom I was concerned about, rather. And we saw fit, to move on.
But you fixed the house up?
Only after, because remember, we left town and had to move to Houston,
And subsequently, did you repair the home?
Sure did.
And you're there now?
There now. And had good flood insurance. Turns out, because of flood insurance, I was able to pay my house off.
Now, do you have any reason to pass through Pontchartrain Park now that you've been going for so many years?
Sure, I do.
What are your observations about Pontchartrain Park today?
My observation is that someone or some group needs to get together to try and restore the pride and the dignity that came with it originally. And I think it's because we can pass the word on of how we had to get up and do things when we were young. So the younger folks are going to have that responsibility now.
Are you still friends with any of the Pontchartrain Park neighbors?
Sure, yeah. As I say, my partner, we good friends, We're not still in the business because I'm retired and he's trying to retire.
What are your what do you miss most about Pontchartrain Park?
It was more closely knit. The people were closer together, in Pontchartrain Park. I mean, we were all, on the same page, so to speak.
Are there any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I think I alluded to it a few minutes ago, that the younger generation that is coming up now should take advantage of the opportunity to get in there and do the kinds of things that would have to be done when it was originally a park in the living area. And if maybe they would get the taste of being successful at building and getting their family where they want to be, Pontchartrain Park is the ideal place.
Well, Mr. Johnson, we'd like to thank you for participating in this oral history project. Your reminiscences will tremendously add to the breadth of this oral history project. Again, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
This has been a presentation of the Center for African and African American Studies at Southern University at New Orleans and the following sponsors: the National Park Service, the United States Department of the Interior through the Louisiana Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, the Louisiana Office of Cultural Development, and the Division of Historic Preservation.